I'm here with Father Gale Hammerschmidt. You just did a great show with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Really, I think that's kind of what we really hope to do with Life on the Rock, that conversation you had with Brother John. And so we just wanted to maybe talk about different topics. You're student chaplain at Kansas State University. How big is the university?
Yeah, we're just right around 20,000 students enrolled at Kansas State. So,
Wow.
Good size, obviously a good sized college for the state of Kansas. Not as big as maybe some of the schools that you'll find in Texas or Pennsylvania and Ohio, but a nice sized school, 20,000 students.
And maybe we should say too, we need to get you to send those pictures to Greg, our producer, about you have this incredible church you built there. Tell us a little about that. How did you raise the money to build that structure?
Yeah, thanks. It's one of my favorite topics to speak on, and in fact, we'll be on the 28th of January. That's when we dedicate it, and so we're very close to that. We, for 20 years probably, we had a chapel that was too small at St. Isidore's at Kansas State. And so the way it would work is, especially the masses that were on Sunday mornings, it would just fill up, and then you'd have to send people into these gathering spaces to watch Mass on a television screen, even though you're in the same building, but you're in a spillover section watching Mass on a television screen. And we just knew we needed to do something about it. They'd been raising some money even before I arrived. And so it's nice when you arrive and they say, hey, we probably need to do something here. And the good news is, Father, here's $7 million that we've already raised to start.
Wow.
And so I met with some architects, met with a gentleman by the name of Kevin Clark, who I would endorse to anyone as an architect in regards to especially working with university, student centers, Newman centers, building this beautiful church that we have. And so he helped us to figure out what our needs were. Then an estimated cost, we recognize we're probably going to need to raise another $12 million to make all of this happen, to renovate what we had, to tear the old church down, and to build a church of sufficient size. And so we began, probably 5 years ago, and we even had a transition of a bishop. A bishop left, was called to become the new bishop in Tucson, Arizona, and so we had about a 9-month period where we were waiting to see if the next bishop would even approve of such a plan, and our current bishop in Diocese of Salina, Gerald Vinke. Bishop Vinke showed up, and he was the perfect guy. He's a huge supporter of college ministry. And so we just kept on. We worked with an organization out of Omaha, the Steyer Group, to raise the money. And ultimately we just began a campaign where we reached out to alumni, to those who believe in the Catholic faith. I would say it again and again and again in traveling the state and beyond, that I believe that St. Isidore's is the most important church for the future of the Catholic faith within the state of Kansas. That was my line. Just because, the University of Kansas, good friends over there, but there's more Kansas kids that actually go to Kansas State. University of Kansas, great university. A lot of out-of-state kids that are there. And so just kind of if you're banking on kids coming to a university and then returning to the state of Kansas, it's going to happen probably more so at Kansas State than at the University of Kansas. So that's the line, we get them for 4 or 5 years, and if we can train them in the faith, and then send them back to communities, cities within the state of Kansas, that it's going to pay dividends within each of those communities. And so we were very successful. People were so incredibly generous, and we were able to raise actually quite a bit more than that 12 million plus the 7. So we were able to raise over $20 million to do this project.
Yeah, it's a beautiful church, huge structure, and I know sometimes it's contentious, like the interior of the church. Was that your decisions, or do you have committees?
We do. We have a committee, and for the most part, it wasn't too contentious. We would have ideas that would be thrown at us by some of the architects. Bruce McMillan was a local architect, also a great man, Kevin Clark. Our committee, we have students actually that are a part of the committee. A young man by the name of Ridge Pinkston, and he's the local expert in church architecture. And I remembered early on when he was telling me he should be on the committee, and he's one of my favorite students. And I was like, I don't know about this. This may be a bad idea. And so I just pulled out a book, and I knew the answer just because it said it on the back page. Like, okay, what style of architecture is this? Or what style of architecture is this? And he just kept nailing it, like one after another. Oh, well, this is what this is about. And here's why this wouldn't make sense to do these sorts of things. Another young lady by the name of Grace, it's on the building committee. And then community members. Some really wonderful, wonderful people are on our committee. And so we come together and we hire experts, people who know what they're doing. Evergreen Studios out of New York has done an incredible job in the interior kind of design. And you can look at it, there's these options. What do you think? Do you like this? Or do you like this? Our committee would look at us, well, we think we like this better than that. And so that's kind of how we came up. And I think anybody could probably Google our church, St. Isidore's Catholic Student Center, Manhattan, Kansas, and see some of the pictures of our Facebook page, et cetera, just to see if they want to, listen to this and see what we're talking about. Because we are very, very excited about this church that we'll be opening.
I know, it was just so unusual. I mean, oftentimes, like, students and around the university, there's not a lot of money thrown at the Catholic Church or anything. And yet, was it a big challenge for you personally to head up this thing and to organize it? And
it was a lot more fun than I thought it would be. It was daunting at the start. But the Lord is so one thing you need to realize, Father, is that the Lord has blessed me beyond belief. Like, He knows how inept I am in most things. And so He just continues to surround me with good people and make things easy on me. And so that's happened for me from the start. And it's been such a joy. There've been some difficult days. There's been some difficult days, but it's been about a 5-year project. And you say it's strange that people are throwing this money at us to build this thing, but honestly, it's a bit of a renaissance, a resurgence, if you will, in university, like especially secular universities. I could probably easily name 5 or 6 of them within the last 10 years, or that are in the same shoes that we're in, that are about to open really incredibly beautiful student-centered churches.
And didn't University of Nebraska, Lincoln build they built it.
So Kevin Clark, my architect, he was an architect on that project as well. Okay. And so University of Lincoln and Nebraska, Father Mattia, he's been there for 25 years. What a great man. I'm try to model myself after him and all that he's done with college ministry. And so he, invited us, our team, to Lincoln. And we met Jude Werner, who's a great development man at the St. Thomas in Lincoln. And then Jude introduced me to Kevin Clark. And so again, that's my ineptitude, if that's even a word, ineptness, has been just blessed by these people, the University of Nebraska and Lincoln. I have a great friend, one of my best friends is the chaplain at Oklahoma State University. They're building a center that's even probably going to cost a little bit more than ours. And they've got an incredible location. So you look at their football field where the Oklahoma State Cowboys play. Right there, right there, basically adjacent to the parking lot, almost in the parking lot, is going to be this $20-some million Catholic church and student center. And, Father, the other thing that I'll bring up, that when I say sometimes there were some tough days, every now and again when it would be like in our college paper, there'd be some story on us building this new church. The same old things would come at us. Oh, yeah, I see how you are, Catholics, spending all these millions of dollars building a church for yourself. But what are you doing? Is that really what Jesus wants you to do? Why don't you help the poor? Right. So we started a program. In fact, we started a program to give meals. We're giving 500 meals away every Wednesday night to any student who needs a meal. And so we're like, well, why can't we do both? We can do both. And the other thing that I really believe in is that I really believe that beauty changes the world, that it matters. And Catholic churches need to be beautiful. Right. It can transcend things. It can change the heart. Your heart is elevated to heaven. I talk too much sometimes, but so cut me off when you want. But I'll maybe conclude with this story, a story that I'd heard. Who knows? How or when it happened exactly, but it's a story I'll never forget of an argument like this taking place. Some non-Catholic kind of getting upset outside of this basilica, yelling at the Catholic that walked out the doors, and why do you build such beautiful things when we have all of these poor people on our streets? And a poor man walked up and started to listen to this conversation. And he said, do you mind if I say something? He said, I'm homeless. That's my status. I don't have a place to live, and some of that's because of my own decision. Some of that is circumstance. But the reality is every morning I walk past this church, and I walk up those stairs, and I spend 5 minutes inside of that church. And it's the best 5 minutes of my day. And then he turned to the person who was chewing the Catholic out and said, now, why is it that you want to take this away from us, me?
Right.
And so beauty matters.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to build a beautiful church at St. Isidore's in Kansas State.
Yeah, I think that's so true. Like when the church possesses these beautiful things, it's for the people and anybody, right? You can come and pray, and you think of like St. Peter's got these great treasures in Rome and stuff, and it's just,
and where else are you going to go for free
right,
and see one of the most famous carvings of Michelangelo?
Yeah.
You're not, but there it is, right there at St. Peter's.
Right.
Yeah, somebody was shocked, absolutely shocked, when they heard that we were going to keep the doors of St. Isidore's open for people just to come in and pray. No, they'll probably lock it down after services, right?
Yeah.
Something that beautiful. No, it's a gift to the people. We want the students. We want a story of St. Thomas in Lincoln, Nebraska, at the University of Nebraska. They tell me that a young lady who was from overseas had found out she wasn't Catholic. She might have not even been Christian, but she found out that a family member, a dear, beloved family member, had just died. And around that time, as she was getting off the phone, this tragic news, she just heard the invitation of the bells of their church ringing. And she walked into that church and just had a sense of peace. Yeah. It's a gift not only to the Catholic kids on campus, but it's a gift to all people.
Maybe this is an opportunity to bring Pope Benedict into it. We just had his passing the other day, and he wrote so well and profoundly on beauty, and just had a great sensitivity in his life. I think of music, he loved Bach and Mozart first, I think, then Bach, and played the piano himself. But the beauty of his expressions and his preaching, and the way he'd say things, always so striking. What are some of the things that have touched you about his pontificate? It might be beauty or something else.
Well, for sure. And one thing he didn't hesitate to do would be to wear just the fanciest of vestments.
Right.
And there's something about that. There's something about that. So many people that I know that come into the church because of the glory of it. And like there's something special going on here.
Right.
It's not just a guy behind a podium preaching, but there's something mysterious that I don't understand. And Benedict really would have definitely understood that. We talk about Pope Benedict, and I have my own little dime podcast. It's called Cons of Catholic, and we did an episode on Benedict just this past week where we reflected upon his life and what it's meant to myself and the producer. And I was in seminary in Denver, Colorado for 7 years. And so when I decided to go to the seminary.
You make it sound like a prison center.
I probably do make it sound like that, but it wasn't. I have nostalgia. Like when I drive back to Denver and I drive through the streets of Denver, I'm sad. Like sometimes even tears come to my eyes like, man, I miss this so much. But nostalgia, you know how nostalgia works. You only remember the good stuff. I don't remember all of the tests that I had to take.
Stress.
But the 7 years that I was there began really right after Pope Benedict took the papacy. He was named Pope. And then my first year as a priest, that's when he stepped down. And so the entirety of my seminary formation was under his pontificate. And that matters. I think that matters. Like, who's the Pope when you're in the seminary? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I remember is this, and I bet it wasn't that way for other popes. All of us, every one of us, we loved Benedict. I would imagine that, when guys were going through the seminary, there's some things about John Paul II that they didn't like. Obviously, now you probably talk to seminarians and say, well, what do you make of this Pope Francis character? And you're going to find some guys that are going to have some critiques. We loved him. We loved him. He spoke so clear, so clear. His 3 encyclicals, just amazing. And that's what we would study. That's what we would read. That's what we would even chat about, at dinner. And he just was kind of a theologian that could write clearly. He could speak clearly. We celebrate his gift of the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Obviously John Paul II commissioned it, but Benedict was at the heart of putting it together. I think it's a great gift, so that's what we're also studying in the seminary. And as you brought up, just his appreciation of beauty made us appreciate beauty.
Right. I preached this morning at the Mass. We've been celebrating like memorials for his passing, Mass of the Dead, and at first, I wanted to say something about him, and it was just overwhelming. How do you can't sum this up,
Right.
But I tell you, I just putting some energy and effort into it, and reading some stuff. And I've always loved Benedict, And in fact, even today, I think I use his stuff more than even John Paul II, like in preaching, and help me to just his scripture commentaries, what he said about, and his saints. Those catechesis on the saints, they're like awesome summaries, because he gives you the context of like what these church fathers lived in and their overall theme and the greatness of what they did or achieved or a problem addressed. And he just was this systematizer that could analyze stuff. And that's one thing I was always taken by him, like the Ratzinger report and everything. He could say, this is the error, of the day. This is where this ideology fails, and just sum it up so beautifully. But too, this morning we were praying the Rosary after Mass, and it just kind of hit me too about there is like this simplicity of his faith, even though he's this great academic, extremely articulate, huge scholar. He almost had like this childlike quality of like, this is the faith. And he wasn't going to be shaken by whatever the German church could throw at him, the German bishops. Said it comes and it goes, and there's something about his last testament, he credits his father for showing him the faith and the firmness of it and stuff. Another thing that was beautiful for me is after reading his series, Jesus of Nazareth, especially the first book, I could see those themes all over the Catechism. You could see his hand in the catechism. You can also see John Paul II's, obviously. But, what a big impact. And I just learned, too, that he was just a peritus at the council, but he really contributed to some of the documents in serious ways.
So this genius, he's a genius. We can't deny that he's a genius. The way he could speak so many languages, just like John Paul II before him. But he never got wrapped up in the fact that he was a genius. The producer of our podcast, his name's Andy Brandt, and he slid me a note the other day that basically said, in 1997, Ratzinger, and who of the popes is maybe even more famous by their cardinal name than by their pope name, Cardinal Ratzinger, that he asked John Paul II if he could step down from being cardinal and just become an archivist. Here, this great theologian, he wanted to write, he wanted to be an archivist, and John Paul II said, "No, no, I'm not going to let you. I'm not going to let you do that." I can't imagine that. Obviously, it was unprecedented, basically, for him to step down from being the Pope, but probably anybody who knew him would not have been surprised by that, because, a genius, a guy that could take his genius, systematize it and write it clearly. It was so needed and is still needed, right? For him, he could simply explain why it's right, why it's wrong. His famous quote, there was the Cardinal Ratzinger fan club. People used to wear T-shirts, Cardinal Ratzinger fan club, and in the back it always said something like, "Truth is not determined by a majority vote." No, truth is true.
Yeah.
And the dictatorship of relativism that he was always fighting.
Yeah.
That was definitely a theme for us as we were going through the seminary. It's obviously an important theme to continue to speak on.
Yeah, and you think of like the tag team of him and John Paul, even his CDF head, and it's like, man, what a glory. That John Paul's traveling and so good with people, and the great evangelist and catechist in his own right, obviously.
Yeah, since 1981, I think I'd heard that Ratzinger was in Rome, always in Rome since 1981, because John Paul II said, I need you.
Yeah.
I need you.
I know. I heard that story. Raymond Arroyo interviewed him when he was still just with the CDF, and it was so beautiful, one of the most beautiful stories that he would, when his term was up at the CDF, he would go to John Paul, and I think he did it twice. He wanted to go back to Bavaria, eat white sausages, and do theology. And I think he was going to do it a third time, ask him again, and John Paul's got Parkinson's and all this stuff. And he said he looked at John Paul, he said, how could I not stay?
Right.
How could I not continue to do this? He saw him suffering so much. And I think that was, to me, it was like fitting that John Paul stayed in office. There was something that just made sense to me, that he was just such a father figure and had such strength, and I think he witnessed in his terrible sufferings at the end of his life. And at the same time, I feel like, with Benedict stepping down, I did feel like, why do we want to punish these guys, just wring them out to their very end? I think for me, John Paul, it made sense. For Ratzinger, I don't know, I thought it was a good precedent.
And it'll be interesting to see where it goes into the future. Yeah. I laughed. I remembered when he stepped down, when Benedict stepped down, we were all laughing like, well, has this ever happened before? Yeah. Like, do we have any precedents for this? What do we do in a situation like this? And we all rejoice in being Catholic, because what other Christian organization or church can say, oh, well, there was that time 720 years ago that this happened, and here's what they did. I don't think other faith denominations are probably going to be able to say, 720 years ago, here's what we did. Yeah. Peter Seewald wrote 2 great books. They're just interviewed back and forth with, first one I think was just with him as Cardinal Ratzinger, and then another one, I think they were called Salt of the Earth and Light of the World. I think it was Peter Seewald. I'm pretty sure that was the name of the guy who just interviewed him. And I read both of those and absolutely just loved this man, the way he would answer the questions honestly. Amazing. Yeah. And I heard that. I knew a priest that was in one of his seminars or something they would teach. And he said they would have this big discussion, and Ratzinger would just summarize the point, in a generous way, and then give his take on it. But he was, he'd listen intently and be able to distill it and get the essence of it and present it. And, something else comes to mind. I got the great blessing to go to Rome for the close for the year for priests. Father Miguel and I went. And so I forgot, in the square, probably had like pushing 20,000 priests in the square. And he was coming out for a Q&A and a blessing with the Blessed Sacrament. And so he processes through the crowd, the Pope Mobile, he pulls up to the steps of St. Peter, gets out, and he turns around, and he sees where all these priests are there, just filling the whole piazza. And I remember this wave of emotion went through his face, went across his face. You could see him kind of get a little choked up. And I just felt, it was just such a great connection, that he, I don't know, you think of, academia could make a person kind of dry or whatever and aloof, but I never got that from him. And I think all those conversations he would have with people, I think that greatly blessed his communication skills to articulate these things. I talked to this one priest that was just helping out in one of the congregations, maybe it was a CDF or something. He bumped into Pope Benedict in the gardens, and he said he sat and had like a 30-minute conversation with him. Benedict was wanting to know about his experience and what it was like and all this kind of stuff. I was like, wow. I desire to be like that. Most of the time people bump into me, I'm just like, hey, I'm on my way somewhere. Sorry, we'll talk again later. And you hear the same thing of John Paul II. amazing man. It'd be fun to do a best theological, like top 10 theological minds of the last 1,000 years, and see where he would rank.
Yeah.
You know, when you were just talking about the way he could summarize everything, you think of Aquinas. I mean, just assume you just think of like Benedict had that kind of mind, and yet he had the other friends or theologians who were thinking outside the box, and he would still be able to work with. He was a liberal. They considered him a liberal in his early years, and then by the time, as the world changes, he didn't change. The world changes. All of a sudden, who's this staunch conservative? And just a great mind and a great man. We're definitely gonna miss him. But then again, I bet you he can do some amazing things up there, interceding for us down below.
That's what I remember talking to Father Stan Fortuna after John Paul died, and he's a huge John Paul devotee, and he said, I said, I feel like it was such a loss for us, to lose. He said, no, Father. He said, he can help us more from heaven.
Amen. Amen. We lose sight of that sometimes, but it's something that we definitely need to be thinking of. Mother Angelica, we still have no idea what she's able to do for us even now.
Yeah. I was recently started reading his Benedict's Reflections on Vatican II. He wrote in the 60s, just after the council. And they're not like super deep or academic, but he was very much for the changes in the liturgy and all of that. And some described it, because he's an Augustinian, and that, so there was a feeling that I'm completely out of my league now, but like the Thomism could be somewhat stifling, or it can, maybe its interpretation could be stifling. And I think he did bring that quality of being able to take the good from where he found it, maybe seeds of the gospel, wherever he found it in the culture, or issues people were having. It seemed like he could go with that, even though it might be coming from a very liberal source or something. He could take what was good there and use it, to help proclaim the gospel in some way, in a better way, which I thought was an incredible quality, to have that. But
not afraid to dialogue. With even ideas that weren't necessarily true. But and then to help us see exactly how they fall short of the truth.
Right. This maybe takes us back to how we started the conversation too, that we interview a lot of people from the Midwest, Upper Midwest. I live with 3 Upper Midwest guys here in the community, and they all got great work ethics. And I'm just thinking about it now. I mean, we have just a lot of people that have a fruitfulness to their mission and apostolate. And the Midwest is known for the work ethic. In the South, everything takes 2 weeks to get done or get started. Everything. We're not known for our work ethic down here. But you mentioned it on the show that too, that you feel like you're surrounded by good people. And even like I was recently in Poland, Maximilian Kolbe's place, Nipokalanov, and he had some saintly figures around him, and to be able to do what he did too. And maybe you could give us your what do you think about that?
Well, it's interesting that as we talk about even the saintly figures with Father Capon, coming from Kansas, and then even Blessed Stanley Rother coming from just south in Oklahoma, very much of the same kind of culture, the farming background, the agricultural upbringing. And even St. Isidore's, the campus center that I work with at Kansas State, St. Isidore's, that's St. Isidore the farmer, the patron of farmers. And so, I don't know exactly what it is, but I do think that there's, the dignity of labor. There's something about that, the dignity of labor. And in Kansas, you have to work hard. You just have to work hard. I mean, if the farmers aren't working hard, is the corn isn't gonna grow on its own. The wheat's not gonna grow on its own, and so we're surrounded. Even my family, we weren't necessarily farmers, but my good friend Father Brian Lager most definitely was. His whole family was. Him and I were in seminary together, ordained together, and just being around a guy like that makes me want to work harder. You see a work ethic, and it's infectious. It makes us all want to show up on time. We want to get the job done. I worked at a place called Al's Chickenette when I was in washing dishes and cooking chicken at Al's Chickenette in Hayes, Kansas, when I was growing up. And I learned to work hard, and I just see that that's just what we have. And so I also think then when you're surrounded by an ethic that you understand the dignity of human labor, when you're dependent upon the earth, you're dependent upon nature for crops to grow, that then there's also something with all of that combined that makes our recognition of a need for God maybe more profound than somebody working in a technological or in an industrial setting or world. And so we just recognize on our own we're a mess. There's not a chance.
Right.
And for maybe some reason, just like those of us in the Great Plains region, the Midwest, it comes more naturally to us.
Right. Well, tell us some of the stories of the students you work with, some powerful experiences you've had at the Student Center and with the Panda organization.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, prayer in action. I like that you called it Panda. It's funny because...
you call it Panda?
Well, the whole thing. So we did the television show, Life on the Rock, talking about the mission program I started, Prayer and Action, some 15 years ago. And it's basically local mission work in one's own backyard, basically, in one's own diocese. And so we get high school kids volunteer for a week in the summer. And even the name Prayer and Action, when I was told that I was going to be leading this up and the diocese was going to be supporting me in doing this and giving some funds we received through a grant from Catholic Extension, because we're a mission diocese. There's a lot of things that happened all at the same time. And they said, okay, now you're going to go lead this backyard mission program. Right. What we call it, STARS, backyard missions. And we're trying to convince high school kids to come. And another seminarian, friend of mine, Brian Ziegler, he was also going to be helping me out that next summer. And he says to me one day, hey, we have to have the perfect name for this program. If we have the perfect name, this thing's going to really, it's going to thrive. Right. And I remember telling him, like, listen, Brian, we don't really need to have the perfect name for the program. All we really need is to have a good program, and then the name becomes associated with that program, and the name becomes great. And I told him that. And he comes back to me later that night, and he says something like, I got it. I have it. What's that? The name for the program. And I do love where it comes from. It's a quote from John Paul II. It says, look to Mary to see how to follow God's call. First she held all things, pondering them in her heart. And then she went in haste to visit her cousin Elizabeth. And that's how we follow God, with prayer and action. And so he said, that's the name of our program. And I said, what are you talking about? I don't know if I like that name. But since I just told him the name didn't matter, and I've grown to love the name. I love prayer and action, prayer and action, prayer and action. I mean, my life is synonymous with prayer and action. But what I didn't realize also at the time, that I was going to learn to love that name, but I had no idea until maybe a year and a half, 2 years later, that if you're going to abbreviate prayer and action, and so you take the P from prayer, and then you write out the word and you take the A from action, P and A, that spells the word panda.
But they're not known for action, are they?
No, I mean,
they sit around eating bamboo all day.
Archdiocese of Kansas City and Kansas, who have their own prayer and action program, they use a picture of a panda head in promoting their mission program. I'm the founder.
Before you did.
I'm the founder of this thing. And I'm like, what do we got here? Panda. Like, people are like, what? I talked to the college students, like, what are you going to do this summer? Oh yeah, I'm going to be a missionary for Panda. No, I founded this program. You can't call it Panda. But, they don't listen to me. So yeah.
But isn't it on your website?
Well, I think you might have been looking at the Kansas City website, actually. Yeah. But again, Panda, even the Salina Diocese kids, which is a part of who I work with, they call it Panda as well. Everybody does, except for one group in Madison, Wisconsin, and they might be. I think they're doing it better than anybody else. Madison, Wisconsin. They changed the name. They call it "Love Begins Here," by the Mother Teresa quote. Right, when she would talk about people always want to say, "Hey, I want to." She'd be an American. She said, "Well, everybody wants to go to India and work with me in India." She said, "No, get to know your neighbor."
Right.
Love begins here. And so the folks in Madison, they've been at it about as long as we have, and they've got an incredible program doing much of the same stuff that we do. Local mission work, helping people, elderly, the poor, the handicapped, praising God at night, celebrating the sacraments, for a week at a time. They work with middle schoolers and high schoolers. I would imagine Madison, Wisconsin, they're putting 1,000 kids a summer through their program that are spending a week serving. For us, it's probably closer to 400 or 500. And it's amazing. Savannah, Georgia has it now. They're doing a great job. But this program has changed lives, and it's affected the lives of my college students. I mentioned this on the television program that just the other day I was standing around a fire with some of my students, and these are kids from Wichita, from Kansas City, from Dodge City, from a number of different parts of Kansas. And almost to the person, they could tell me how when they went on a mission trip through prayer and action in high school, it deeply affected them. And I think that the way it affects people, the reason it affects people is because there's just a connection of the heart that we miss out on far too frequently. That was my story. The first time I went on one of these mission trips, I was my upper 20s, a bit of a mess, and said yes to going as a sponsor, an adult sponsor with high schoolers. And we painted a house for a woman, a Hispanic woman. I couldn't communicate with her. I didn't speak any Spanish at that time. I've been blessed to learn Spanish since, to a degree. I've lost a lot of what I've learned, but couldn't communicate with her. But I heard the story of what we were doing. She was dying. She was dying of cancer, and we were painting her house. And she, upon death, was going to be, her body was going to be displayed in the parlor, in the living room, as we call it now, of her house. And she knew that family and friends were going to be coming to pray for her after she had died. She was very embarrassed about the way her house looked on the outside. And we went and we painted it. And to see her eyes, even though I couldn't communicate with her, and the joy and the gratitude that she felt, it impacted me deeply. That heart-to-heart connection, and so I see that with the students as well. You tell a story of students who they go to a house to paint the house, and generally maybe we send a team of about 10. So a typical week you might have 70 kids, high school kids, and then some adult sponsors with them. And you break them into 6 or 7 different work crews, and you send them out to do 6 or 7 different jobs. And sometimes the job is not much. It's painting a small house. It's doing a little bit of yard work. And maybe half the kids are painting. Maybe half the kids are painting, but then the other half are inside getting to know the person that lives there. And I remember stories of just these particular young ladies who are talking with elderly women or men who had been recently widowed. And they're just sad. They're sad. And you can just see, like, people say, like, I see their sadness. It's as if with the passing of their spouse, they've lost their heart. And they're sad. They're always sad. The people in the communities we're working for will talk of them. Yeah, he used to be vibrant. We used to see him at Mass, daily Mass. And now it's just the sadness has crept in. And understandable, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But then these students go to paint the house, and some of these young men and women, they just... They awaken the heart of these elderly. There's one gentleman who actually, the last morning that the students were there that had been working on his house, he actually got out of his house and hopped in his like Model T that he had in his garage, this super fancy old car that he liked to show off, and he drove that to the church just to thank the kids, to say goodbye to the kids, hugs and tears. It's insane to see what just the sharing of one's heart can do. And so that's kind of stuff that we would do, and it's this stuff then that changes the hearts of high school kids, that makes them understand that just being, whatever, on their phones, we take their phones away for a whole week. it's the hardest thing in the world. You almost think that we're chopping their arms off when we ask them to hand their phones over on a Sunday night, and then we give them back on Friday. Boy, they're not missing out on anything. They're living life perhaps for the first time. Really.
Right.
Investing in the people sitting across the table from them, hearing the stories of the elderly they're working for, and then sharing the graces. Like at night, one of the big components of our prayer and action program is to share the graces at night as to how you saw God working throughout the day, and being able to be courageous enough to stand up and say, I saw God here. It changes people. And so that feeds St. Isidore's and Kansas State University, and St. Lawrence Center over at KU, or St. Paul's University Parish in Wichita State. My former associate is now the chaplain, Father Drew Hoffman at Wichita State, and this guy's the most dynamic guy on earth. But this kind of stuff, right? These kids sharing of their heart with other people through these missions, it changes all of our campus centers, and people recognize there's something that these kids have that I do not have, and I wonder how I can find it.
Yeah. Let me ask you, like, in the priesthood, how has this affected you, or maybe what principles do you bring to the priesthood in your work? Because, obviously, I guess any vocation, you can get into a rut maybe, or you can get routine and kind of get dead. How has it affected you, and how do you let it affect you?
Right. Much of what we're doing is on the heels of recording the television program. But I mentioned that I didn't want to go. The first 2 mission trips I went on.
Let me ask you real quick on that, because did you actually hear a voice that told you you're going to be okay?
Yes. Yeah. So this is, probably in the depths of my stupidity and selfishness, and really buying into the promises of the world. And that there was a time that I was relatively broken, and I knew it was my own fault. I knew that it was choices that I had made that had brought me to this circumstance without going into great detail. And I found myself going to the Adoration Chapel, blessed enough that I'd had an encounter with the Adoration Chapel. That's where I went to pray. And in that hour,
that was on campus?
It was in the city of Manhattan.
Oh, okay.
But it's
Manhattan
just
kids.
Man, the little apple, that's what we call ourselves. There was a parish that has a 24/7 Adoration Chapel. And so this is where I was actually a school teacher. I was teaching at this Catholic school. And so we had an Adoration Chapel there. And I just went, and again, I didn't know how things were going to work out for me. I was nervous, just knew that I'd made a mess of things. And I remembered in that hour, like as close as I've ever experienced it, like a voice. I can't tell you if he had a high pitch or a deep voice. It wasn't like that. It wasn't, he spoke English, but it was with a certain, accent. No, but it was just the heart, right? Yeah. The voice of the heart that gave peace overwhelmed me in that hour of adoration. That when I walked out of it, I knew I was going to be okay. But I also knew that I had to start saying yes to him, right? And so one of the yeses I gave was to go on a mission trip, to be that adult leader going on that mission trip where I encountered that woman who was having her house painted because she was dying. But, from the time I said yes to the time I actually went, I just became hesitant to go. I didn't want to, we all experience that. A lot of people sign up for a week of mission, or even a conference or a trip to EWTN, and then when it actually gets to be, okay, we got to pack our bags and go, like, maybe I'll back out. I mean, people drop out of these kinds of things all the time. That's what I wanted to do, but I couldn't. And so I went, right? I didn't want to go, but I went, and my life was changed. My life was changed. And like I said, I told him that first day that I was there painting that house, I didn't want to be there. I wanted to be with my friends playing golf back in Kansas or whatever I'd be doing. And yet, the last night I was there, I explained if I could stay here doing this for the rest of the summer, I absolutely would. It was the first time I really lived as a Christian. That's how I described it. The first time I really lived as a Christian, rejoicing in all of the glory of God, praising Him, sharing the graces where I saw Him throughout the day, hearing other people share those same graces, and then laying down my life for the good of another instead of just trying to use others for my own good.
Right.
I was pouring myself out for others. And so that realization, that impacted me, that, okay, never forget that you didn't want to come to this. Don't forget that. But you still said yes, and you did it. You're so grateful that you did it. Even yesterday, flying here. You know how it goes. A young man talked to me in the terminal before I got on the plane. He said, "You Catholic?" I said, "Yeah." And, dressed as a priest. And he said, "I went to confession for the first time in 5 years recently." I'm like, "That's awesome. That's great. That's great." Right? Get on the plane. I've got things to do. I've got stuff to listen to, and I'm a mess and selfish still. Lo and behold, I sit next to this kid.
Oh wow, that's a God thing.
Yeah. And well, so here's the funny thing about it. Lo and behold, I sit next to him. Yeah. But what I didn't recognize is that when the steward or airline attendee, whatever we call them, he said to me, he said, "Hey, the row, that there's the exit row that has a little bit extra space, and he said, would you like to come and sit there? Your legs are a little bit long." I was like, "Yeah, sure. I'll always use a couple extra inches of space." And that's when I went and sat next to that kid. He asked the attendant to invite me to sit next to him. Wow. And so it's a God thing. It's a God thing in that he's and he wanted to say, I wish it was just more of a happenstance, Father, that God had put us next to each other, and that I didn't have to manipulate the situation to get you to sit next to me so I could talk to you. But what I love about this, I'll preach about this someday for sure, is that God invites us then to be also cooperating in His grace. Yeah. And when this kid says, "Okay, there's a priest on the plane, see if he'll sit next to me." Yeah. That's perfect. That's more of a God moment, I think, than if I just happenstance would have been put right next to him. Yeah. God started it, but He also invited this young man to be courageous to talk to me in the terminal, then to invite me to sit next to him so he could talk to me more, and then to share his story, his life. And so again, one of those things where I don't know if I really want to do this. If I really want to spend the next hour and a half talking to somebody on a plane, when I could be listening to a podcast and becoming holy, right? But then I did it, and even this morning, as I'm pondering and waking up and thinking about yesterday, where was God present? Where were my graces? It was in that. I didn't want to do it. Perhaps the inclination was to say no, but I said yes, and God blessed me. And I think that's the reality. That's even in the priesthood. So many times you experience it. Somebody's at the door. You got to go and act in charity, and you're just thinking to yourself, "I don't want to do this." But when we're generous, Father Drew Hoffman, my former associate, the Diocese of Wichita is generous, right? They give me an associate priest. I'm the Diocese of Salina. Diocese of Wichita gives me an associate priest at Kansas State, even though we're not in their diocese. Yeah. Because there's so many Wichita kids at Kansas State. First, Father Drew Hoffman, now Father Matt David, both incredible young priests that are working alongside me at Kansas State. Father Drew Hoffman always talked about the law of the gift. Yeah. You're not going to outgive God. Right. You may not want to give, but give, and God's going to give you more. Yeah. And it's true. It's so very true that even though the inclination is to say no. And so my priesthood, it can get in a rut. Absolutely it can. And at times it does. But what do I need? When that happens, I need to get out of myself. I need to step out of myself. And generally, it comes in serving somebody who's in need, serving the poor. I mean, Mother Teresa would talk about that all the time.
Yeah. All right. Well, any closing thoughts? Got about just a minute or so.
Hey, EWTN's the best. That's my closing thought. Listen, when I was going through those days, when the Lord was speaking to me, start to say yes. That's when I first discovered EWTN. I'm watching Benedict Rochelle. I'm watching Mother Angelica. I'm watching you. I'm watching The Journey Home. I am just enthralled by all that EWTN was about. And this day that I've spent here in Alabama has been insane. I've done radio stuff. I did the TV stuff. Now we're recording.
You did radio today?
Yeah, I did radio spots.
How did they find out?
I don't know. But they heard that I have a face for radio.
They're poaching our guests.
I was there. I was recording all sorts of stuff, making up prayers on the spot. It's insane. And so, the thing is my closing thought would simply be this. what God told me in the Adoration Chapel that day is start saying yes to me.
Mm-hmm.
And if people start saying yes to God, they're going to be blessed. Even in the midst of the trial, the tribulation, the struggle, the sufferings, there's a blessing.
Yeah.
You know, the sufferings become easier to deal with because he's alongside you. He's suffered. He knows. More bearable is maybe a good way to say it. You can bear them easier than your suffering because he's at your side. If you just start saying yes to him. But the joys become even more joyful. And that's what I've experienced today, just incredible joy. This is so much fun to be here doing this. I loved EWTN for many, many years now, and here I am in the heart of the EWTN world in Irondale, Alabama. Is that what it's called? Irondale,
yeah.
Here I am.
Yeah.
Everybody's like, you ever been down there? I'm like, I've never been down there, but here I am. And I have to leave soon, but I wish I didn't.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for
Absolutely.
coming, saying yes, and joining us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Absolute pleasure. God bless you.